I never saw it coming. How could I? I was just sitting there unwinding at the dinner table after a long, exhausting day, enjoying a rare moment of quiet, then, out of nowhere, Lila, my 42-year-old wife, looks me straight in the eye and casually says she's going out to dinner with a colleague. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Dinner with a colleague, no big deal, right? But let's not fool ourselves. This wasn't just some innocent work dinner. No, this was a date, plain and simple. She tossed it out there like it was no more important than running to the store for milk. Just cold matter of fact, like my feelings didn't even register. To give you some context, Lila and I got married when she was just 22. Back then, she was young, naive, and frankly pregnant. We didn't have a clue what we were doing, but we pushed forward anyway like so many young couples do. Thinking back now, it's almost funny how lost we were. People in their 20s today seem so much more put together than we ever were back then. Still, it wasn't all bad. We had some great years, especially in the beginning. After we got married, I dove headfirst into work, building up a business and investing. It's always been my thing. The business took off, and we ended up making more money than we ever dreamed of. Life was comfortable, even enviable by most standards. But let me tell you, all the money in the world can't prepare you for what came next. We had a son, a beautiful boy, and our pride and joy. But he was born with a serious illness, and no amount of money, no doctor, no treatment could save him. Watching your child suffer while knowing you're helpless to fix it is a kind of agony that sticks with you forever. He fought hard, but in the end, we lost him. That's when Lila began to change. I understood her grief. I really did. Everyone handles loss differently. But Lila didn't just grieve. She shut me out entirely. On the surface, we were still married, but emotionally, we were just two strangers under the same roof. I tried everything: therapy, vacation, stepping back from work, anything to get her back, but nothing worked. For years, it was like living with a shadow of the woman I married. She was there, but she wasn't really there. Even the professionals couldn't break through to her. Eventually, she started to come around, but she was never quite the same, and honestly, I wasn't sure she ever would be. Fast forward to that night at the dinner table. Lila tells me, just as casually as if she were talking about errands, that she's going out with this guy from work. Just a friendly dinner. She said. She went on about how supportive he'd been, how she needed someone to talk to. Yeah, right? Like, I'd buy that. It wasn't about talking. She claimed he made her feel better, that he gave her energy she hadn't felt in a long time. I just froze. What was I supposed to say? My wife was essentially telling me she was going on a date with another man, and she didn't even try to sugarcoat it. I didn't want to blow up or start a screaming match, so I got up and walked out of the kitchen. I didn't grab my keys or my phone. I just walked out. Lila came after me, and I'll never forget the desperation in her voice. Wait, it's not what you think. Please just listen. She pleaded, but what could she possibly say to make this okay? That it wasn't cheating? That I was overreacting? She kept begging me to hear her out, swearing it wasn't what it looked like. Then she said it. The thing that really cut deep: he's helped me feel alive again. You don't understand how much I've needed this. Needed what? A dinner? A man who wasn't me? I didn't respond. Couldn't. But in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. If I told her not to go, she'd still go. That's just who Lila is. She always gets what she wants, no matter who gets hurt in the process. And this time, I wasn't about to let it slide. Not this time. I put up with plenty from Lila over the years, but this was the line in the sand. I needed answers, cold, hard proof of what she was really up to. So I made a call to a friend of mine, someone with the right kind of connections. He knew people who could dig up dirt on anyone, and I didn't hold back. I told him everything that had been going on, and he quickly set me up with a private investigator. I wanted it all, every scrap of information about this guy, who he was, what his life was like, what his intentions might be. I wanted to know where they went, what they talked about. And yes, I wanted pictures. I needed to see them together up close and personal. Deep down, I already knew this wasn't just dinner. Something about it felt wrong off, and I wasn't about to sit idly by while my life crumbled behind my back. I needed to know the truth, plain and simple. So that's how I left it. The investigator was on the case, and I was left waiting to find out who this guy really was, what Lila was hiding, and how I was supposed to deal with it all. Yeah, I know what you might be thinking. Why not confront her right then and there? But if there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that sometimes patience is your best weapon. You let the truth come to you, and when it does, that's when you strike. For now, I waited. That's how it all began. The detective didn't waste any time. Just a few days after I gave him the green light, he came back with some intel. The guy's name was Ethan. Figures, right? There's always a guy with some plain, forgettable name like that. But don't let the name fool you. Ethan wasn't just some nobody. He had a family of his own. 2 kids, a wife, a respectable job. The guy lived in a typical suburban McMansion complete with a white picket fence, probably a dog in the yard too. On the surface, it was the picture-perfect life, but we both know appearances can be deceiving. Guys like Ethan, they always have something to hide, and I was hell-bent on finding out exactly what that something was. The detective didn't just stop at the basics. No, he delivered the full package. Ethan's home address where his kids went to school, what his wife did for a living, even the kind of car he drove. It was all laid out in front of me. A neat little dossier on the man my wife thought was worth dressing up for and spending time with. I stared at his picture for a long time. At first glance, he looked harmless. Just another middle-aged guy who probably cared more about football and yard work than anything else. But I wasn't naive. Looks can be deceiving, and I wasn't about to trust anything at face value, especially not with Lila refusing to come clean. I wasn't going to wait around for her to tell me the truth if she even had the guts to do that. So I started making moves. When you've got the kind of resources I do, you don't just sit back, you act. Money wasn't an issue here. This wasn't about the cost. It was about my pride. It was about uncovering the truth. And yes, it was about revenge. That's when I made my next call. Ryan, an old friend of mine with the kind of connections that come in handy in situations like this. He owed me a favor or several. And when I told him what was happening, he didn't hesitate. He got someone on it immediately. Enter the girl. Let's just say she was exactly what I needed for this kind of job. Young 27 or 28, maybe with long blonde hair legs that went on for days, and a face that could stop traffic. She was the kind of woman who could make a guy like Ethan forget all about his cozy suburban life. Ryan showed me her picture, and I didn't even have to think about it. I gave him the green light right then and there. She was perfect. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. You can probably guess what kind of work she did for a living, but let's just say she was very professional. I'm not about to spell it out here. I know how these things go, and I'm not looking to get flagged for inappropriate content. Let's just leave it at that. She was exactly what I needed with her on board. The plan was in motion. The plan was really starting to come together, but I wasn't about to just set Ethan up and leave it at that. No, I needed to cover all my bases. This wasn't just about Lila anymore. It was about getting the full picture. I arranged for someone to tail Ethan to see what he was up to when he wasn't with her. How did he spend his time? Where did he go? I wasn't interested in just a one-off dinner snapshot. I needed to understand his life, his patterns, everything. The private investigator was still digging, and the girl was prepped to make her move. I had no doubt Ethan would mess up. Guys like him always do. And when he did, I'd have all the evidence I needed. Everything was on track, or so I thought. Then Lila blindsided me. The day before the supposed date, we were sitting in the kitchen. I was doing my best to keep things cool, playing the part of the clueless husband while secretly orchestrating her downfall. That's when she looked up from her phone and casually dropped another bomb. I've been thinking, I'm not going to meet Ethan tomorrow after all. For a second, her words didn't even register. Was she backing out? After everything I put in motion, all the effort I poured into this, what the hell was happening? I forced myself to stay calm. Oh, why not? I asked, keeping my tone as casual as I could. She hesitated for a moment before replying. I've just changed my mind. I don't think it's appropriate. Instead, I'm going to meet up with a friend. We're going to grab dinner at that new place downtown. I stared at her, my mind racing. None of this added up. Maybe she really had second thoughts about Ethan. Maybe she realized how wrong it would be to go through with it. But the way she said it, the hesitation in her voice, the slight unease, it didn't sit right. Something about this wasn't adding up. And then there was that friend. Was it really a friend? Or was it still Ethan under a different excuse? Or worse, was there someone else entirely in the picture now? I knew better than to push her on it. If I acted too interested, she'd get suspicious. So I nodded, pretending I was fine with it. But inside, I wasn't buying it. Not for a second. There was no way I was letting her off the hook that easily. The plan stayed on track. I wasn't calling off the private investigator or the girl just because Lila decided to change the narrative. Whatever she was really doing, whether it was with Ethan or someone else, I was going to find out. So I sat there playing along, acting like everything was normal, but in the background, I kept pulling the strings. I wasn't stopping until I had the truth. Lila could change her story all she wanted. I wasn't backing down, and you know what? My gut had been right all along. Despite what she told me in the kitchen, Lila was still planning to meet Ethan. Her actions spoke louder than her words. The detective confirmed it with his latest update. Lila had made a reservation for two at a fancy restaurant. Not just any restaurant, but one of the spots we used to go to back when things were good between us. But that wasn't the worst part. She'd also rented a hotel room. Not just any room either. This one was $400 a night. You don't drop that kind of cash on a room if you're just planning to talk. I didn't need a genius to figure out what was really going on here. Dinner, drinks, and then, well, you get the picture. My blood was boiling just thinking about it, but I couldn't lose my head. This wasn't the time for rash decisions or heated outbursts. I needed to stay focused, think things through, and keep my cool first things first. I had one of the detectives keep tabs on Ethan's house. I needed to know if his wife would be home while Lila was out playing house with him. Everything needed to fall perfectly into place. This wasn't just about catching Lila and Ethan red-handed. Oh no, the goal was much bigger. I wanted to bring Ethan's entire world crashing down. I wasn't going to let Ethan walk away from this unscathed. No way. He'd chosen to get involved in my life, and I was going to make damn sure he paid the price. But waiting, that was the hardest part. Sitting there knowing exactly what was happening, knowing what was about to go down, and yet being forced to bide my time until the perfect moment to strike. Then the first piece of the puzzle arrived, a photo. It showed Lila sitting with Ethan at the table, leaning in close, laughing, completely at ease, like she didn't have a husband at home wondering where she was. But honestly, that wasn't what really set me off. No, the second photo was the one that hit me like a gut punch. It showed them kissing right there in the middle of the restaurant without a care in the world, like this was perfectly normal, like there weren't two families being ripped apart by what they were doing. I felt my blood boil. I wanted to explode, punch a wall, smash something, anything to vent the fury that was bubbling up inside me, but I couldn't lose control. Not yet. This was only the beginning, and I needed to see it through. I knew they weren't stopping at dinner. That hotel room was still waiting for them, and I had no doubt it was their next destination. But before they got there, I had to make another move. I picked up the phone and called the detective who was watching Ethan's house. "Is his wife home?" I asked. "Yeah, she's here," he replied. "Perfect," I said, feeling a cold satisfaction settle over me. That was all I needed to hear. I sent him the photo of Ethan and Lila kissing, along with very specific instructions. I'll never forget the rush of satisfaction I felt knowing exactly how this would play out. The detective went to Ethan's house and knocked on the door. I'm sure Ethan's wife wasn't expecting anything unusual. Maybe she thought it was a delivery or a neighbor stopping by, but what she got was far from routine. The detective didn't waste any time. "Do you know where your husband is?" he asked. "Of course," she replied. "He's working late." Sure, Ethan was working late, just like he probably always said whenever he was sneaking around behind her back. The detective pressed her gently, and I could almost picture the unease creeping over her, the way her mind must have started racing, wondering if something had happened to Ethan. Was he in trouble? Was he hurt? The detective reassured her. "No, he's fine," he said, "but I think you should see this." He handed her the photo, the one of Ethan and Lila kissing. I can only imagine her reaction as she stared at it. The way her world must have started to crumble right then and there. She stammered something about Ethan working late, about him coming home soon, but the detective calmly cut her off. "He's not working late," he said. "He's on a date." And just like that, her carefully constructed reality fell apart. I could already picture the next steps. As soon as the detective left, Ethan's wife would be dialing his number, screaming at him, demanding answers. And when Ethan saw her name pop up on his phone, his stomach would probably drop. He'd scramble to come up with an excuse, try to calm her down, but it wouldn't work. She'd be in full meltdown mode, and Ethan would have no choice but to drop everything and rush home, desperate to salvage whatever was left of his life. While all that chaos was unfolding on Ethan's end, I was at home, waiting for Lila to walk through the door like nothing had happened. I sat there staring at the photo of her kissing Ethan. That was the moment I felt the last bit of love or respect I had for her evaporate. That image burned itself into my brain, and I knew there was no coming back from this, but it wasn't over, not by a long shot. This wasn't just about catching Lila in the act or humiliating Ethan. No, this was about dismantling everything they thought they had piece by piece. Lila believed she could pull this off without facing any consequences, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. I'd spent years building a business, making connections, learning how to control situations and bend them to my will. This was just another problem to solve, another deal to close. And when it was all said and done, Lila and Ethan would regret every decision that led them to that dinner table. My moment for revenge was finally within reach. It was all within reach. I'd been patient, playing the long game, letting everything unfold exactly as I needed it to. Now it was time to pull the trigger. Remember that blonde I mentioned, the one with the flawless looks, blonde hair that shimmered and legs that seemed to stretch forever? She wasn't just some random girl. She was the final piece of my plan, the tool I needed to deliver the final blow. And while you've probably guessed her profession by now, let's just say I'll keep it vague for obvious reasons. When Lila left for her date, the blonde was already at my house. She looked even more striking in person, wearing a sleek, form-fitting dress that left very little to the imagination. We sat down and had a few glasses of wine. Truth be told, I needed the wine more than she did. I wasn't nervous, not exactly, but the anticipation of what was about to happen had me on edge. After all, it's not every day you plan to cheat on your wife, even if it's purely for revenge. But was it even cheating? Could you really call it that after Lila had already destroyed our marriage with Ethan? To me, this wasn't betrayal. It was payback. After a couple more glasses of wine, we headed upstairs. Let me make one thing perfectly clear. There was no passion in what happened next. No love, no lust, not even a flicker of desire. It was mechanical, almost cold. A transaction pure and simple. This wasn't about pleasure or connection. It was about one thing. The moment Lila would walk in, my mind wasn't on the blonde or even on Lila really. It was all focused on what would happen next. I was going through the motions not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. This was the final act of the play, and I wasn't going to stop until the curtain fell. Right on cue, I heard the front door creak open. Her footsteps echoed as she walked through the house, getting closer. We didn't stop. I didn't even flinch. I wanted her to see. I needed her to see, and then there she was. The scream that came out of her was instant, piercing, guttural. It wasn't just a yell. It was the kind of scream you let out when your entire world collapses in an instant. She froze in the doorway, eyes wide with shock. Her face as pale as a ghost. Her body went rigid as the scene unfolded before her. Everything she thought she knew about our life, about me, was crumbling right in front of her eyes, and she couldn't make sense of it. The blonde didn't stick around to savor the chaos. She moved quickly, slipping out of bed and getting dressed with an efficiency that told me she'd done this before. She didn't say a word, didn't even glance at Lila. She just walked out as if rehearsed, leaving the two of us alone to deal with the fallout. That's when Lila completely lost it. I'd seen her angry before, but this was something else entirely. Her rage was unfiltered, wild. She screamed at me, her voice cracking as she hurled accusation after accusation. I was the one who destroyed our marriage. I was the reason everything had fallen apart. She paced the room, throwing her hands in the air, her fury spilling over like she thought she could somehow undo what she just walked in on. I didn't say a word. I let her scream. I let her pace and rage. Let her curse and point fingers. I stood there calm, waiting for her to burn through her anger. She was grasping at control she didn't have, and I wasn't going to interrupt. Finally, she paused to take a breath. That's when I moved slowly, deliberately. I pulled out my phone and held it up. On the screen was the photo. The photo. The one of her and Ethan kissing at the restaurant. The one she probably thought I'd never see. I locked eyes with her and said, in a calm, steady voice, I know about the hotel. The one you booked for tonight. The one you planned to spend the night in with Ethan. Her face fell instantly. The fury that had consumed her a moment ago was gone, replaced by something else entirely. Shock? Fear. She opened her mouth, trying to stammer out some kind of explanation, but I didn't want to hear it. I cut her off before she could even get started. You're staying there tonight, I said flatly. I asked, my voice cold and sharp as ice. That room won't go to waste. She didn't respond right away, but I could see it. The gears in her mind turning. scrambling to find an escape route, trying to twist the situation to make herself the victim, but there was no way out. Not anymore. She tried, of course. How could you do this to me? She screamed, her voice trembling with anger and desperation. After everything we've been through, you're the one cheating now. How can you even live with yourself? I just shook my head, almost laughing at the absurdity of it. You think I'm the one to blame here? I asked, incredulous. You went out with another man. You booked a hotel room with the full intention of sleeping with him. Don't stand there and act like you're the innocent one in all of this. She kept trying, though. She threw every excuse, every bit of deflection she could muster, hoping to make my actions seem worse than hers, but I wasn't biting. I stayed calm, firm, and let her know the truth. This wasn't on me. This was her fault. Her choices, her decisions, everything she'd done had led us to this moment. From the emotional distance she created to her affair with Ethan, this was all on her. Eventually, she realized she wasn't getting anywhere. Her shoulders slumped and the fight in her eyes flickered out. She grabbed her purse, fumbled with her phone, and called a taxi. I didn't stop her. I didn't even flinch as she packed a small bag, her face a storm of anger and humiliation. I knew exactly where she was headed, to the hotel she'd booked for Ethan. Only now she'd be spending the night alone. The door slammed shut behind her, and I was left standing there staring at nothing. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel satisfaction, just emptiness, the kind of emptiness that follows the end of something that had been slowly dying for years. Sure, a small part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction. Revenge, after all, is sweet in theory, but it didn't fix anything. It didn't heal the void she'd created in our marriage or erase the years of damage she'd done. It was just the end, but this wasn't the end of everything, not yet. The next phase of my plan was already underway. Lila wasn't just going to walk away humiliated. She was going to be utterly destroyed. Divorce was inevitable. After everything, the lies, the betrayal, the complete lack of remorse, it was the only logical step. I wasn't going to waste another moment trying to salvage what was left of us. I didn't care about her excuses or her apologies. As far as I was concerned, our marriage had ended the moment she walked out with Ethan. Everything after that was just legal formalities. I wasted no time. I hired the best lawyers money could buy, and I don't mean regular lawyers. I mean the kind who don't just win cases. They annihilate their opponents. I laid everything out for them, every detail, every demand. I wanted Lila out of my life completely, and I wanted her to leave with nothing. This wasn't about fairness. This was about consequences, and trust me, I had the resources to make sure she paid the price for every single thing she'd done. The first thing I did was cut her off completely. I blocked her on every possible platform: calls, texts, emails, you name it. If she needed to reach me, she'd have to go through my lawyers. There was nothing left to talk about. The moment she walked out that door to meet Ethan, any last shred of care or affection I had for her disappeared. We were done. The divorce process dragged on longer than I expected. These things always do, especially when there's money involved, and we had plenty to fight over. The house, the business, the investments, every last asset. Lila thought she could play hardball. She assumed she was entitled to half, that she could walk away with a hefty settlement and start fresh. But she underestimated me. She didn't understand the lengths I was willing to go to ensure she got only what she deserved and nothing more. Court dates, lawyer meetings, depositions, it was ugly. A grueling process. And not once did we exchange a single word. Every time we were in the courtroom together, we barely even looked at each other. I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye, watching her try to keep a composed facade, but I could see it. She was cracking. This wasn't the Lila I once knew. This wasn't the same woman I had married. Lila was hanging on by a thread, desperately trying to maintain control, but she was slipping fast. My lawyers were relentless. They dug into every detail of our prenup, unearthed every loophole, and presented every piece of financial evidence that worked in my favor. And those photos of her with Ethan, they were the final nail in the coffin. The evidence of her affair was undeniable. She couldn't spin it, couldn't weasel her way out of it. She was caught, and the court saw the truth for what it was. Her fault, her betrayal, her destruction of everything we had built together. The process dragged on for months. Some days it felt like it would never end, but I wasn't in a rush. Patience had gotten me this far, and I knew it would carry me through to the end. Every passing day brought me closer to closure, and every passing day I could see Lila losing ground. Her shoulders sagged a little more with each court appearance. Her once sharp demeanor dulled to something almost pitiable. She'd gone from fighting me at every turn to barely showing up at all. Deep down, she knew there was no escaping this, not this time. And then, after what felt like an eternity, the day finally came. The judge handed down the final ruling, and it was exactly what I had hoped for. I walked away with nearly everything. The house, the business, the majority of the assets. Lila? She was left with scraps. A small settlement that might carry her through a few months, but not much more. She tried to argue, of course. She claimed she needed support, made her case as pitiful as she could, but the evidence was against her at every turn, and the court sided with me on every major point. It was over. I'll never forget the look on her face when the ruling was read. Disbelief, rage, maybe even a flicker of regret. But honestly, I didn't care. All I knew was that I had won. I had taken everything from her, just as she had tried to take everything from me, and she was left with nothing. As we walked out of the courtroom that final day, I didn't say a word to her. There was nothing left to say. We were done, completely, irrevocably done. I didn't look back, and I haven't looked back since. But here's the thing. Even after all that, there was no real satisfaction. Sure, I'd come out on top. Sure, she was out of my life, but there was no moment of triumph, no real victory. What was left was the hollow aftermath of a marriage that should have ended long before it did. I won the battle, but the war was hell, and no one comes out of something like that unscathed. Strange standing on the other side of it all, looking back, the lies, the betrayal, the divorce, it all feels surreal now, like it happened to someone else, like I lived through some twisted story I never signed up for so long. It felt like I'd never get to this point, like Lila's chaos would haunt me forever. But here I am. I'm still standing, still living, still moving forward. The first few months after the divorce, they were rough. I thought that once everything was settled, once I'd taken her down and gotten what I wanted, I'd feel relief. I thought winning would fill the emptiness she'd left behind, but the truth is nothing really prepares you for the aftermath. The silence, the weight of everything you've lost and endured. You can't just erase years of shared history or patch up emotional wounds overnight. There's no magical moment where everything snaps back into place. Rebuilding takes time. I had to relearn who I was outside of my marriage. For so long, my entire existence revolved around her, catching her, exposing her lies, and exacting my revenge. When the chapter finally closed, I had to figure out what was left of me. I threw myself into my work. All that energy, all that focus I had spent on Lila, I redirected into expanding my business. I poured everything into it, and it paid off. The company is thriving like never before, and financially I'm in a better place than I ever thought possible. Money can't fix everything, but it sure makes starting over a lot easier. And yeah, I got help too at first. I resisted. I didn't want to sit there spilling my guts to some stranger, but little by little it worked. Slowly, I started letting go of the anger and bitterness piece by piece. Those emotions can weigh you down if you carry them for too long, and I realized they weren't worth holding on to. The process wasn't quick or dramatic. It wasn't like flipping a switch. It was more like chipping away at a thick wall bit by bit until finally I could see through to the other side. I began taking better care of myself, both physically and mentally. I got back into working out, started eating healthier, and made room for things I actually enjoyed. I rediscovered hobbies I'd long forgotten. Things that had nothing to do with Lila or the wreckage of our marriage. Those moments helped me rebuild a life that felt like mine again. Not something cobbled together from the ruins of what we had, but something completely my own. As for relationships, that's another story entirely. Right now, I'm not looking for anything, and honestly, I don't think I will be for a long time. I've learned that some things just might not be for me, and relationships are probably one of them. After everything I've been through, it's hard to trust love the way I used to. It's hard to imagine letting anyone get that close again. I can't picture giving someone that kind of power over me. Not anymore. People like to say you shouldn't let a bad experience define you, but this wasn't just one bad experience. It was everything. Everything I knew, everything I trusted, and it all collapsed, And you know what? I'm okay with it. I'm okay being on my own. Some people act like you need someone else to complete you, like your life only has meaning if you're part of a couple. I've learned that's complete nonsense. You can be whole on your own. You can find peace, happiness, and fulfillment without relying on anyone else to give it to you. I don't need a relationship to feel like my life has purpose. These days, my focus is on me, on my work, my health, and my future. I travel when the mood strikes. I spend time with friends. My life is drama-free, simple, and quiet. And honestly, it's exactly what I need. Will I change my mind one day? Maybe. Who knows? But for now, I'm done with love, done with relationships, done with putting my heart on the line for someone else. If I've learned one thing, it's that the only person I can truly count on is myself. And that's enough for me. So yeah, I'm doing well, better than I have in years, and if that means staying single and keeping my focus on myself, then so be it. I've earned this peace, and I'm not willing to give it up for anyone not anymore.